members of the audience, if you want to make a point of information, I should have told you that at the beginning. You can all stand up and ask to make a point, then it's up to the speaker to decide whether or not to give it to you.
Don't tell them that now. Doesn't matter.
So to second the motion tonight, we can welcome Robert.
Someone whooped. I'm going to address my speech at you, madam. Thank you, Mr. President, for inviting me here today and for drawing attention to the fact that people can interrupt me at will. We've heard that political correctness seems to mean a lot of things to different people. The phrase political correctness is now an insult. It's pejorative, and so it's very useful for people to label things that they don't like political correctness. Political correctness gone mad, when in fact what they're doing is just complaining that someone is stopping them from doing something that they used to do, that things have changed since the old days. This was what you were talking about, Mehdi. But political correctness is not about sticking with the old ways, old words. You mentioned Winterval, actually. I'll talk about that first of all. That was an example of a headline, a Daily Mail headline. It was what Winterval actually was, ladies and gentlemen, was an internal document by, was it Birmingham, Wolverhampton? Birmingham Council. It was an internal document. It was to do with businesses in the area, what they were going to do to promote the city around the very long period between Diwali and Eid, all the way through Christmas, all the way through to New Year. The council called it Winterval. A tabloid picked it up and said, there's a war on Christmas. And isn't it funny how the war on Christmas starts earlier every year? It's the joke that goes with that. Another example of political correctness is health and safety. You can't take a bunch of scouts shinning up the Eiger anymore. Political correctness gone mad. No. These are laws designed to protect people. Of course we can't do things like the old days. And the other thing, which makes me really angry, is when people equate political correctness with human rights. Oh, the terrorists don't really respect our human rights, so why should we respect their human rights? No. No. Human rights, thank you, no. Human rights set a benchmark. They outline the very least we should do for our fellow human beings, over whom we have power. And because it's always the hated society, like terrorists or prisoners or sometimes ethnic minorities, who they're meant to be inconvenient, because they're meant to frustrate the mob rule, the pain that we feel in our gut, the need for revenge. They're meant to frustrate that. They're meant to be inconvenient. But they're not political correctness. Maybe we can have a debate about human rights another time. These things get called political correctness, but actually they are a different debate. More fruitful and more fascinating to my mind is how it relates to expression, what people say and what they write. Mehdi mentioned I work for an organisation that campaigns for freedom of expression. It does seem sensible to restrict violence in terms of incitement, egging people on. If you call for someone to be beheaded or thrown out of the country, you're actually endangering people. And we've seen in Africa, in Rwanda, what damage a radio can do. That's the most extreme example. So there's no consistency whatsoever in me as a free speech campaigner saying that incitement should be stopped. It's that incitement should be against the law. The court should stop it, the police should stop it. Will, I don't think what Lynette said was incitement. I don't think there was a clear and present danger. So I agree with Mehdi that it was totally wrong that Lynette was visited by the police. Thank goodness it only happened once. Thank goodness we're vigilant against that sort of thing.
That is not, in fact, the case.
Point of information. Point of information?
Sure, absolutely.
But it hasn't happened once, has it? It also happened to a pensioner couple in Lancashire.
It's all appalling. And I don't...
Ah, all at once.
OK, I concede it, absolutely. But it's appalling. And when incitement to violence, absolutely, it should be stopped. But if... Well, hate speech is the term we give to it. Hate speech, some people do... I can't decide. Some people do think that should be banned. But personally, I don't. I don't want to engage in that. Hi.
Do you accept that the police behave in that way because of a culture of political correctness?
No. I think they behave that way because of a culture of poor leadership, because people from the leaders at the top just, you know, don't give enough leadership, I think. They don't have a robust sense of themselves, to borrow a phrase from my colleague. I think it's part of the speech. I must, to anticipate, I must move on. I don't think hate speech should be banned by law. How to combat hate speech? With more free speech, and this is my favourite form of political correctness, is more free speech. It's funny how when people get, shall we say, caught out in a political correct debate, like Bruce Forsyth last week, that they're so quick to argue for their own right to free speech, but then as soon as someone stands up and says, I have been offended, they complain, shout political correctness. Well, political correctness is not about you can't say that, although it might seem that way if people are lazy with words, and there are a lot of lazy people. Instead, it's about saying, I have been offended. Did you mean to do that? And when we're asking to be politically correct, I think we're asking three things. The first is for people to acknowledge the context of what they say. The word, and I'll say it once, the word nigger is offensive because of its context, because of its history. When football commentator and manager Ron Atkinson used that about Marcel Desailly, I think, he should have known this. He should have known the context. The same with Packy, I'll say that once as well. Anton Dubek, or Mr. Beek, should have known the context of what he was saying. And in fact, he did, because he immediately apologised. As soon as someone stood up and said, I've been offended, he apologised. The person that didn't know the context, that didn't know the history of that word, was Mr. Forsyth. And he tried to brush it off as political correctness. People should get a sense of humour. That's the modern equivalent of saying, let them eat cake. It's an entire failure to understand the context of what it is you're talking about. Carol Thatcher, after being caught out calling someone a gollywog, refused, which is a huge history of being a racial slur, she refused to apologise for what she said, a complete lack of history in that person. Should these people be on TV? Should we buy their newspapers? Should we vote for them? I wish presidential candidate John McCain had understood the history of the word, I'll say it once, cunt, before he shouted it at his wife in front of reporters. Now, we're actually we're largely ignorant of the history of that word ourselves. Which is why comedians, I think, feel appropriate to drop the C-bomb, but not the N-bomb or the P-bomb in their delivery. The second thing I think we want to ask someone when they're politically correct is that they don't present shoddy arguments. Gay rights, climate change, immigration, which is what you mentioned, Will, Islam, these are really complex issues. There's a lot of subtlety required to say anything sensible at all. And when a tabloid journalist or a politician makes some remark like, you know, it's all the immigrants' fault, immigrants are ruining the country, we're right to be outraged because they're ignoring the subtlety, the complexity of these political debates. I used to work in a political think tank in Westminster, and you can have a debate on immigration. They do it all the time in Whitehall. They do it on the television. What you can't do is say something crass half a conversation, half a soundbite, and expect the rest of us to accept you as a genuine political player. The third thing that I think political correctness asks is that you respect the name that someone gives for themselves. We all know how bullies operate. They call you names. Specky Four Eyes is what I used to get called. And now, look at me, I've got contact lenses in. I come out, I'm a spectacle wearer, and not bad. They call you names, and the act of naming is extremely powerful. And it's the first tool we have against combating homophobia, racism, and other bigotries. The history of political correctness is about people choosing names for themselves. African American, gay, queer, or Mumbai, or Istanbul, or refuse collectors. These are examples of empowerment. They're a statement that who you are is something to be proud of and not something to be ashamed of. And of course, those other people that want you to be ashamed, they use the old words. Now, we've heard the name Orwell bandied about here, so I'll jump in and talk about it. Because of this renaming, political correctness gets called Orwellianism. Look, they've renamed something. It must be Orwellian. It must be Newspeak. No, that's really lazy thinking. Two reasons. The first, Orwellian Newspeak is the act of the powerful, the establishment. And that's the opposite of what political correctness seeks to do. That's the weak and the bullied reclaiming language, reclaiming their name from, that the powerful have given to them. Second, Orwellian language, if you read 1984 or Politics in the English Language, that kind of renaming is designed to make you forget history, forget concepts. And that's not how political correctness works at all, not at all. PC is the opposite. It reminds us of history. It doesn't let us forget, even hundreds of years later. Remember Tony Blair's apology about the slave trade, which a lot of people called political correctness at the time. What's it got to do with us? And so when someone complains about, say, Black History Month, oh, we don't have a White History Month, why is there a Black History Month? They're trying to make you forget history, the history of the minorities. So, respect for context and history, subtlety, respect for names. Political correctness is about good manners. Not manners for opening the door or what tie you wear at the debate, but manners for political debate, which is what it refers to specifically. So it doesn't matter if you pause and choose one word over another. That's called diplomacy. And if you refine your speech, if you acknowledge the point of view of other people, then what you do say will be much more persuasive, especially with those who might disagree with you. You don't have to have good manners because there isn't a law that says you must. Poor Jeremy Clarkson, marginalised on the pages of a daily tabloid newspaper, the only place where he can find an outlet for his views. He is politically correct, but he's never persuaded anyone of anything. He's preaching to the crowd. They already agree with him. So if we want to be effective, if we want to actually make a difference, then it's context, subtlety, and respect for other people, political correctness, that will see us through. Thank you very much.